Hi guys, it's Mike 1013 for FlopTurnRiver. Today I want to talk about checking back the turn. More specifically, when you were the pre-flop raiser, you c-bet the flop and your opponent called, and he checks to you on the turn. When should you consider checking back the turn? Well, clearly, if you have nothing and the turn didn't improve you and you don't think your opponent's going to fold, that's one situation to check back the turn. But the more interesting situation, perhaps, is when you have a hand that's very often good, but it's not a monster. You'll want to consider checking back your hand in those spots where there aren't very many better hands that will fold, and there aren't very many worse hands that will call. If both of those are true, then your bet will be neither for value, since worse hands won't call, and it's not a very good bluff either, since better hands won't fold. So in that case, it's better just to check back. Another thing to consider is how aggressive your opponent is. If he's the type of player who might be able to check raise you as a bluff and get you to fold the best hand, then that's another reason to check back. Most of these spots for checking back the turn with a hand that you think might be best will occur when the board is dry, when there's not very many draws present. If draws are present, then there's a whole category of hands you beat that you could possibly get value from by betting. But when there are no draws possible, there are much fewer hands that can pay you off with a worse hand. Therefore, you're less likely to be losing value by checking back on a dry board than on a wet board. Now, by checking back the turn in the right spots, you gain several advantages. First, because your hand is marginal, you probably don't want to put in a lot of action with it, so you're probably going to fold to a check raise. So by checking back, we prevent ourselves from getting check raise bluffed off the best hand. Second, your check may be perceived as weakness by your opponent, and he may bluff or he may call a bet with a worse hand on the river than he would have done on the turn. So you get more action from worse hands by checking back and seeing a river. Also, by checking back some decent hands, you'll be strengthening your checking range. If your range for checking back the turn is only air, then your opponents will realize that they can just fire on any river and you'll fold almost everything. By checking back some decent hands, you prevent being exploited in this way. Finally, when your opponent does have you beat, when you have the worst hand, checking back the turn will oftentimes save you a bet. Let's take a look at a few example hands where we may want to consider checking back the turn. Okay, so let me go over the Hud Stats a little bit that I have here. First number is VPIP, second number PFR, and on the next line we have c-bet and fold to c-bet, and those are really the only stats we'll be needing today. Let's get started. This first hand here happens at a 25 NL table. It folds to us in the cutoff with King-Jack offsuit. We open, and we get called. Now, our opponent looks kind of like a reg. He looks decently aggressive. So he checks to us on the flop, and we have top pair, so we bet. He calls, and we see a turn. He checks again, and it's on us. Now, I think a bet here doesn't really accomplish very much. If we bet, he doesn't have worse kings in his range that can call. Remember, he's a reg. He's probably not playing kings worse than King-Jack suited. He probably doesn't have any King-10 or worse kings. Moreover, he isn't going to necessarily want to call with a lot of his small pocket pairs. Let's say pocket pairs below 8s he won't call with. So by betting here, we only really get value from 10s, jacks, and he probably won't have queens in his range. Moreover, if he caught some kind of 9, he's not necessarily going to want to call again. So we don't get value from much worse hands. Do we fold out better hands? Well, I don't think we fold out better hands. I don't think he folds king-queen, ace-king, and he certainly won't fold a set. So a bet here doesn't accomplish very much at all. By checking back, maybe he'll interpret that as weakness, and on the river he might check call something like pocket 8s or pocket 7s. Or he may be inclined to bluff himself on the river, which he would have folded had we bet here. So we do much better here by checking back and letting him make mistakes on the river because he's not going to make a lot of mistakes on the turn. Okay, let's take a look at another hand. This hand happens at a 10 NL table. There's a limp under the gun. It's on us on the button. And our opponent looks loose and passive and not very good. And we have the button, and we have a decent hand. So we raise it up. It folds around to him. He calls. He checks to us on the flop. And we go ahead and c-bet, which is kind of marginal. But I think looking at his fold to c-bet stat, it looks like he's playing a little bit fitter fold on the flop. So this should be a profitable c-bet. But he calls. On the turn now we make top pair, and he checks to us. Now, this hand is much different from the previous hand because the player is worse and likely to pay us off with worse hands, and the board is a lot wetter. There's a lot more draws. There's flush draws, there's open-end straight draws, and because of the nature of this player, we expect him to call, probably even with gut shots, probably with third pair. So we get a lot of value here, and I think checking back causes us to miss a lot of value. So I think here we have a pretty clear value bet, so I'd go ahead and bet here. Thanks for watching. Take care, guys.